Have you ever stood completely still in nature and felt like an animal was studying you, not glancing in your direction, not reacting out of fear, actually studying you? A deer pauses instead of running. A raven watches from a branch overhead. A fox stops in the middle of a field and stares. And for a brief moment, an unsettling thought crosses your mind. What if it knows, not your name, not your story, but something simpler? What if it knows that you mean no harm? For most of modern history, scientists would have laughed at that question. The accepted view was straightforward. Wild animals survive because they assume danger. They don't analyze intentions, they don't evaluate motives, they don't try to understand what another creature is thinking. They simply react. Fast movement means threat. Direct approach means danger. Loud noises mean run. The idea that a wild animal might distinguish between a harmless observer and a predator like humans seemed far too complex. Understanding intentions was supposed to belong exclusively to humans. Then something unexpected happened. The evidence began piling up, and the more researchers looked, the harder it became to ignore. Because animals weren't behaving as though all humans were the same. In fact, many appeared remarkably skilled at telling the difference. The story begins in places where humans and wildlife have shared landscapes for generations. In the mountains, forests, and grasslands of the world, animals constantly face a difficult challenge. Every encounter carries uncertainty. A human might ignore them. A human might feed them. A human might chase them. A human might kill them. If animals treated every person as equally dangerous, they would waste enormous amounts of energy fleeing harmless situations. If they trusted everyone, they wouldn't survive for long. Natural selection rewards accuracy. The individuals that correctly identify threats are the ones most likely to live long enough to pass on their genes. Over thousands of generations, this pressure has created something extraordinary. Many wild animals have become experts at reading behavior, and sometimes those skills appear surprisingly sophisticated. One of the earliest clues came from studies involving birds. For decades, scientists assumed that birds possessed relatively simple social intelligence. Then, researchers started paying attention to crows, and crows had other ideas. In one famous experiment, researchers captured wild crows while wearing distinctive masks. The birds were released unharmed shortly afterward. What happened next surprised everyone. Years later, the crows still reacted aggressively to the same masks. They scolded, they mobbed, they warned other birds. Even more remarkable, young crows that had never been captured learned to fear those faces as well. Knowledge was spreading socially. The birds weren't simply afraid of humans. They were afraid of specific humans associated with negative experiences. And they remembered not for days, not for weeks, for years. Think about what that means. Somewhere inside those small avian brains was a record, a mental file. This face equals danger, that face does not. The distinction mattered, because their survival depended on it. The same pattern appeared elsewhere. Wild deer often encounter hikers, photographers, hunters, and researchers. To human eyes, these people may look very similar. To deer, they often do not. Wildlife biologists have repeatedly observed deer allowing certain individuals to approach much closer than others. In areas where hunting occurs, deer become especially sensitive to subtle signals. Body posture, walking speed, direction of gaze, even the way someone moves through the landscape. A hunter tends to move differently from a casual hiker. The deer seem to notice long before the human realizes they've been detected. This raises an important question. Are animals simply recognizing patterns, or are they actually making judgments about intent? For decades, scientists argued for the first explanation. Pattern recognition is powerful. A deer doesn't need to understand your thoughts. It only needs to learn that certain behaviors predict danger, and that explanation accounts for a great deal of animal behavior. But eventually researchers encountered observations that seemed harder to explain. Consider the elephants of Africa. Elephants possess some of the largest brains on Earth. They live in complex social groups. They remember individuals for years, sometimes decades. Researchers studying wild elephant populations discovered something fascinating. The animals reacted differently depending on who approached them. Not merely different individuals, different categories of people. In regions where elephants had experienced conflict with certain human groups, they displayed heightened caution toward those groups specifically. Even when clothing and appearance were altered, subtle cues remained enough for many elephants to distinguish between higher risk and lower risk encounters. The animals weren't responding blindly, they were making assessments, gathering information, adjusting behavior. The more scientists investigated, the more examples emerged. In Yellowstone National Park, wolves have demonstrated an extraordinary ability to evaluate humans. Unlike prey animals, wolves occupy a different position in the ecosystem. They are predators themselves, yet they still devote enormous attention to understanding human behavior. Researchers have observed wolves responding differently to hikers, vehicles, researchers, and hunters. A person carrying equipment may receive one reaction. A person moving stealthily through the environment may receive another. The wolves appear to weigh context, not just presence, and perhaps nowhere is this ability more obvious than among primates. Primates are our closest relatives. Their social worlds are filled with alliances, betrayals, cooperation, and competition. To survive in such environments, individuals must constantly predict the behavior of others. A monkey that cannot anticipate intentions quickly finds itself at a disadvantage. Researchers studying wild baboons noticed that these animals treated local herders differently from hunters. The distinction appeared even among younger individuals. The baboons seemed to understand that not every human represented the same level of threat. Years of observation reinforced the same conclusion. The animals weren't simply reacting to human appearance. They were responding to expected behavior. In other words, they were making predictions. Prediction lies at the heart of intelligence. Every day, your brain predicts. You hear footsteps behind you and anticipate someone approaching. You see dark clouds and expect rain. You observe a facial expression and guess what another person might do next. Many animals appear to engage in similar processes, not identical to ours, but similar enough to challenge old assumptions. A wild animal does not need to read your mind. It only needs to become exceptionally skilled at forecasting your actions, and evolution has provided plenty of incentive to develop that skill. The stakes could not be higher. A mistake can mean death. This becomes especially apparent when researchers examine predator-prey relationships. Gazelles monitor lions, rabbits monitor foxes, birds monitor hawks. Every interaction involves evaluating intentions. Is the predator hunting, resting, distracted? The prey animal constantly gathers information. Humans simply become another part of that equation. Over time, many species have become surprisingly adept at reading us. Some scientists believe this may explain a phenomenon experienced by countless wildlife photographers. Again and again, photographers report similar stories. They approach animals calmly, move slowly, avoid direct confrontation, and sometimes the animals remain relaxed. Another person arrives behaving differently, more focused, more aggressive, more intrusive. The animal leaves almost immediately. Of course, anecdotal observations aren't scientific proof, but they inspired controlled studies, and those studies repeatedly revealed that animals pay attention to details humans often overlook. Eye contact is one example. For many species, a direct stare carries meaning. Predators often focus intensely on prey. As a result, sustained eye contact can function as a warning signal. Experiments involving birds, mammals, and reptiles have demonstrated that many animals alter their behavior when they know they are being watched. Some flee sooner, some become more vigilant, some abandon food sources entirely. They aren't responding to thoughts, they're responding to clues that over millions of years became associated with danger. The remarkable part is how accurately many animals interpret those clues. Then there are dolphins, among the most intelligent animals ever studied. Wild dolphins routinely cooperate with one another in ways requiring extraordinary coordination. They recognize individuals, remember relationships, communicate through unique signature whistles. Researchers working with wild dolphin populations have long noted the animal's ability to distinguish between different human behaviors. Some dolphins willingly approach boats associated with positive experiences, others avoid vessels linked to disturbance or harassment. Their responses are selective, targeted, based on accumulated knowledge. Again, the pattern appears. Not all humans are equal, not all encounters are treated the same, and perhaps this is where the story becomes most interesting, because the question isn't really whether animals understand human intentions perfectly. The evidence does not support that. No scientist believes a deer can read your thoughts. No researcher argues that a crow understands human psychology the way another person does. The real question is different. How much understanding is necessary? Imagine you encounter someone on a dark street. You don't know their thoughts, you don't know their motives. Yet within seconds, your brain begins making judgments based on posture, movement, facial expression, speed, direction, countless tiny signals. Animals appear to do something similar, not because they possess magical insight, but because evolution rewards individuals that become excellent observers. The result is a world far more socially complex than we once imagined. For centuries, humans viewed wild animals as creatures driven almost entirely by instinct. Simple reactions, automatic responses, predictable behaviors. Modern research paints a different picture. A crow remembers, a wolf evaluates, an elephant assesses, a deer decides. Again and again, we find evidence that animals are not merely reacting to the world, they are interpreting it, which brings us back to that strange feeling people sometimes experience in nature. The sensation of being watched, of being evaluated, of being judged by eyes that belong to something wild. Perhaps there is a reason that feeling exists. Perhaps the fox staring across the meadow isn't simply frozen in place. Perhaps the raven on the branch isn't merely curious. Perhaps the deer standing motionless among the trees is gathering information, comparing your behavior to thousands of previous encounters encoded by evolution and experience, trying to answer a question that matters immensely. Who are you? Not your name, not your profession, not your history, something much simpler. Are you dangerous or are you safe? The answer may determine what happens next, and the growing body of evidence suggests that many wild animals are far better at making that judgment than we ever imagined. For decades, we assumed that understanding intentions belonged exclusively to humans. Now that certainty is beginning to disappear, not because animals think exactly like we do, but because they may not need to. To recognize when a human means no harm, all they need is what nature has been refining for millions of years: the ability to watch, to learn, to remember, and to decide who deserves their trust. The next time a wild animal pauses before fleeing, remember this: it might not simply be looking at you, it might be evaluating you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration into the hidden intelligence of wild animals, subscribe for more stories from the fascinating intersection of nature, behavior, and science. There is always another mystery waiting in the wild.